What's up, guys? Thanks for watching. Would appreciate a like, subscribe, comment down below. Would love to see you engage, and thanks for watching. America has had, to put it mildly, a very rough past month. School children at a Catholic school in Minnesota, for example, were murdered while praying. Online division, particularly on the subject of Israel, has reached a fever pitch. The greatest Christian evangelist and model for young men in America, Charlie Kirk, was assassinated and martyred in front of the entire world on camera. We didn't even get to collectively mourn for the 24th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, something we should always come together to do as Americans. So in times like these, it's wise to ask, what causes this? Many people will and have blamed many things. It's political polarization, Biden, Trump, rah. Really? The church has gone woke. Why don't more pastors speak up? Rah. It's the mental health of our young people. We need more SSRIs or cry on the couch therapy sessions or less police. Rah. It's parenting or children or social media, the public school system. Rah. Are all of these things a factor? Maybe. Are all of them issues we should be looking into and dealing with? Yes. But are all of them at root the answer? No. Jesus says in the Bible that you should judge a tree by the fruit that it bears. If it bears fruit, and that fruit both is plentiful in sustenance and taste, then the roots of that tree are more than likely doing well. If it bears no fruit, or if the fruit tastes bitter, the roots of the tree are more than likely corrupted. This is what makes our modern political discourse so foolish and stupid. So many people are, both on the left and the right, mind you, completely co-opted into talking about the fruits of our societal tree, rather than the roots of our societal tree. They see something obvious sprout out of our culture and believe that it is what is causing our culture to go astray, rather than looking at what gave birth to that thing in the first place. Should we have discussions about things like our rapidly rising political temperature and what's causing it? 100%. Should we have discussions about how pastors, priests, and the pulpit broadly have compromised the doctrines of Christianity for people-pleasing fear of man-style presentation? I couldn't think of many things that are more important to address, to be frank. Should we address the rapidly declining mental health of our young people, or parenting tactics, or how children are brought up, or social media usage, or why the public school system sucks? Yes, 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 and wait for it, yes. But all of these discussions are useless without having the discussion underneath these discussions, ergo, the roots of the discussion. And as every person with a fifth grade education knows, the best question to get to the root of anything is the following. Why? Why is our political discourse getting more hostile? Why have churches gone apostate? Why is our young people's mental health so bad? Why does our public school system suck? These questions have not been answered adequately by hardly anyone. We're too busy getting mired in baseless, nonsensical discussions like how Donald Trump memeing Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries with mariachi music is racist, or how we need to quote-unquote love our neighbors takes precedent over quote-unquote loving God, or how we need to shove 1 billion pills down our kids' throats, or believe that yelling at school boards is going to somehow solve something. These conversations, the one we've been psyoped into participating into, all lead to the same place. Nowhere. Our politics is still a zero-sum game. Our churches are still floundering. Our kids are still getting psychologically gutted. Our schools still don't teach. Therefore, instead of entertaining these conversations, most of which are deliberately installed into our discourse to keep us distracted, we must have a new conversation, one that actually gets to the root of the problems that we all experience. There's been a lot of talk in our country, particularly since Charlie Kirk was assassinated, about quote-unquote unity. The people who are starting these conversations, mostly, are starting this conversation for one purpose: to shut up the people who think like Charlie Kirk. We, as Christian, conservative, value-driven people, need to quote-unquote tone down the rhetoric and quote-unquote turn the temperature down. Say the people that mostly agreed with all of the principles and values that the young man who shot Charlie Kirk in the neck and those who paid him to shoot Charlie Kirk in the neck believed in. This is a cultural false flag operation, a ruse, and a psyop. As J.D. Vance so eloquently put when he was hosting Charlie Kirk's show, there is no unity with people who believe that the normalized response to disagreement is assault, murder, and violence, as Charlie Kirk prophetically pointed out in a tweet about rising left-wing political violence. There is no unity with people who believe that saying words is akin to getting punched in the face. But on the other hand, what happens if unity is not reached at all? Well, we will get more incidents of what happened with Charlie Kirk. There will be more assassinations. There will be more school shootings. There will be more political violence. There will be more tyranny enforced on our most vulnerable, our children, our elderly, our poor. If some definition of unity is not reached in America, if we keep going down this pathway, our country will continue what it is doing now, tearing itself apart with blood and bullets paying for the tearing. This is obviously not a good solution. I personally have already seen too much of it. What signals to me, and I believe to all who are observing the same thing, is something very, very alarming. The American social contract is fundamentally broken. The reason why America is descending into chaos is because the fundamental order that America is based on is corrupted, hollow, and rotted. And it has been for many years now. It has not been renewed. So therefore, a weakening structure can only bear so much weight until it snaps under the pressure. Just ask a bridge, for example. If America feels like it is snapping, that's not your imagination. It's because it's actually happening. The way this has been best described, as mentioned, is through a concept called social contract theory. A social contract, broadly speaking, is the relationship between the citizens of a country, both between the citizens themselves and those who rule those citizens. In other words, what does the political order of a society look like? What is acceptable in a society and what isn't? How should we treat each other and why should we treat each other that way? When you look at these questions at a base level, it's hard to come up with others that are more foundational to the success or failure of a nation. If a nation does not know how to govern itself, that nation will collapse in on itself. If a society does not establish norms, taboos, and punishments for their respective violations, then you have anarchy and instability. If citizens do not have base standards for how to treat one another, dehumanization and otherism are the rule, not the exception. When you look at nations that have succeeded throughout history and ones that have failed, there is no clearer line of demarcation than an established social contract. Even if it is deemed morally wrong in today's eyes, and many of them are, to be sure, that does not invalidate social contract theory. In fact, I would argue it validates it stronger than it otherwise would have before. If nations can thrive when there are open examples of things like authoritarianism, bigotry, dictatorship, slavery, and other things, but establish rules around those things make that country thrive in spite of those things, you know that social contracts matter perhaps more than anything else. And humans have always been aware about this, even if we didn't have a name for it. There are Buddhist texts from 2nd century India that outline it, for example. But the first person to put social contract theory in the spotlight was philosopher Thomas Hobbes in his masterwork Leviathan. In it, Hobbes argued that human nature was, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, end quote. Only in, quote, is subjugating some of their, quote unquote, rights to a higher authority, i.e. the state, could a group of people thrive and become a successful culture. John Locke, in his book Second Treatise of Government, differed and evolved from Hobbes, saying that humans under a governing body would be, quote unquote, morally bound to ensure the well-being of their citizens. If they didn't, they would violate the social contract and thus become outsiders. The state would simply be a, quote unquote, neutral judge that would oversee the social contract. It's hard to understate just how important this differentiation was from Hobbes, who advocated for a quasi-tyrannical form of centralized state power. Locke, a devout Christian, drew this conclusion from the Bible, specifically in Romans 13, which argues that all government are God-ordained and that they, quote-unquote, must, quote-unquote, wield the sword to preserve social order. In 1762, the man who put a formal name to it was French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book of the same name. However, Rousseau differed from Locke very seriously, mainly stating that the social contract came from the abolishment of the state, not the empowerment of the state by the citizenry. Rather, the centralized power should lie with the citizens against all forms of quote-unquote tyranny. In other words, mob rule. It didn't take long for the contrasting social contract theories of Locke and Rousseau to flesh themselves out. 13 years after Rousseau's book was released, the American Revolution kicked off. Shortly after that, the French Revolution kicked off. The results of both? America defeated the greatest global power the world has ever known, setting the stage for it to become the freest, most prosperous, and righteous nation in world history. The French Revolution resulted in the murder of tens of thousands, completely upending their social order, plunged their society into chaos and poverty, and empowered a man named Napoleon Bonaparte to quote-unquote save their civilization by establishing a military dictatorship. Once again, as Jesus said, you judge a tree by its fruits. The question of a social contract, of how we treat one another in a culture, is at the root of every quote-unquote political issue that has ever been discussed. That is because how we treat each other isn't a political issue. It's a spiritual issue, a theological issue, one that speaks to the soul, not one that can be defined and boxed in by what you think about the marginal tax rate or racial equity policies in nonprofit organizations. Any examination of real change in culture must start here, or it will end in the same place it always ends. Given this, think about the core of the wrongs that have been committed in America in the last month alone. Children have been murdered. A man was publicly executed for telling people what he thought about things. Our country was robbed of a rare moment of societal unity. These are very deep things that determine the fate and future of a nation and how it proceeds through tragedy. This is also why all the talks of quote-unquote unity right now, mostly coming from people who only want unity on their terms, by the way, cannot be taken seriously. Unity with what? Lunatics putting bullets in kids at an elementary school? People getting assassinated in front of 3,000 college students all armed with video cameras? An abolishment of all rituals and societal norms? If we were to quote-unquote unify with that, we would only be unifying with one thing, and one thing only: destruction. Potentially the greatest film of my lifetime is The Dark Knight. Many people are under the impression that it's yet another Batman movie, a broy superhero popcorn flick. But that couldn't be further from the truth, actually. The reason why The Dark Knight holds as one of the best films in recent memory is that it speaks to social contract theory. What happens when society breaks down? What would otherwise quote-unquote good people do when forced with an impossible decision? How far will you go to preserve your ethics, your morals, and your values? The scene in the film that best defines this dynamic is the immortalized interrogation scene between Batman and the Joker. Allowing himself to be caught, the Joker, a psychopathic, anarchistic, valueless terrorist, is finally face-to-face with his foil, Batman, a principled, value-driven, and grounded hero. Finally getting to speak with him, the Joker exposes the core of his philosophy, one he is evangelizing through his destruction of Gotham City and the abolishment of all of its sacred cows. Quote, "The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules." End quote. It's the irony of this statement that makes it so devastating. Quote-unquote sensible is the last word you would use to describe a world quote-unquote without rules, at least to a rational person. But the key phrase isn't quote sensible. It's quote this world. This world. So the question then becomes, a world defined by what exactly? Well, in the Joker's case, he was trying to create a world that was defined by his worldview: fear, lawlessness, violence. This is an indictment of all Christian, conservative, value-driven people. When you look at the state of our world, particularly within the last month, you will see the Joker's statement made manifest. There are no three better words to describe September of 2025 than one that was defined by fear, lawlessness, and violence. The only sensible way to live in this world is without rules. As mentioned, that statement is correct. There have been many cultures throughout world history that have forged a successful social contract through malicious means. The theory is undefeated. When a social contract is established, a society survives. When one isn't, it dies. The key thing to understand isn't whether societies have an option to establish one or not, because they don't. Instead, it's deciding what type of social contract they want. In other words, in what type of society do you want to live in? What rules should be established? What are the norms and taboos that must be elevated? Therefore, it is my belief that to create a future in America that is going to last, one that is going to provide the same level of flourishing it once did, we must forge and reestablish a new American social contract. What is clear to me, and I believe to most Americans after the events of the past month, is that we need to bring back basic definitions and rules to the forefront. They must be discussed, hashed out, and agreed upon by all sensible people. If we don't, we will lose our country to the new social contract, the ones that enabled the murder of those children, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and nearly everything else that has gone bad in America. The show is going to be dedicated to that new social contract, what it looks like, how it will be enforced, and the why behind it all. This is a bold task, to be certain, one that no man, and certainly not me, should have the power to wield. I believe what I'm going to flesh out today would drastically improve the direction of America for all Americans. It's by no means perfect, but it's better than what we have now. It's not much, but it's something. In Luke's gospel, Jesus Christ makes clear that he did not come down to earth to bring peace and unity. Rather, he came to bring a sword, to set father against son, mother against daughter, to destroy the most intimate relationships in one's life through the truth of the gospel. Jesus did not do this because he likes division. Quite the opposite, actually. Jesus did this because he knew that in order to have peace on earth, the truth must come first. The truth cannot be argued. It just is. Anyone who believes it cannot be welcome. Or anyone who believes it can be, rather, cannot be welcome. What this means is simple. True unity can only come through initial division, from setting the boundaries and ground rules, through separating the wheat from the chaff. This is old hat for Americans. Our first societal contract was set forth in the Declaration of Independence, which set off a bloody, nearly decade-long conflict that put our new nation at existential risk. But yet we got through it. We went through the fire and got stronger as a result. We laid the foundations for a new social contract, which allowed America to achieve all it has achieved and weather all the storms that had become born against it. We couldn't have beaten the British without our social contract, nor we could have ended slavery, given women the right to vote, beat the Axis powers, and given freedom to hundreds of millions of people. A reestablishment and renewal of the American social contract is the only way forward for all who really want to see our country improve. A country goes as far as its values allow it to go. Whether those values are good or bad is up to the people who establish them. There is no such thing as a valueless society. Value is in the eye of the beholder. A society's values are placed in the eyes of the collective citizenry. When the eyes of a country's citizens are set on the proper things, the permanent things, as America once was, that country has a future. If they don't, that country has a deadline. It's up to us, as always, of which path we choose.